So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and Wayne McRoy is back. And we are going to talk about the history of mind control. I guess it will be a very interesting subject. So, Wayne, thank you for coming and welcome.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure. It's been a while since we've spoken, so this is a good way to catch up. And of course,
Yeah.
mind control is a big topic, so it's something I know quite a bit about. I've done a lot of the background research into all of it, and it goes back as far as civilization itself, even further than that, as far back as we could look within the auspices of the various mystery schools. And of course, it's been capitalized on by those in the modern era in some more significant forms. Although the methodologies are still the same, they're tried and true methodologies through all the ages. Now they have advanced technologies that they could use to leverage these same methodologies to achieve certain mind control factors. And one of these is electronic mind control. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we continue with the discussion here.
Yeah. The mystery religions of ancient Egypt, Greece, India, and Babylon, they helped, I would say, to lay the foundation of so-called hidden knowledge. Would you agree?
Oh, most certainly. And hidden knowledge, secrecy is only one aspect to this, and it's one of the key components to mind control. And one of the organizations early on, well, I shouldn't say early on, you're going back to the 1100s, the end of the 10th century here, was the assassins, the cult of the assassins. They're the one that kind of took this kind of to the next level when it comes to mind control, getting people to perform certain tasks without question and offering them promises of paradise if they were to follow orders in this way. And this was done in some very interesting ways, as we'll get to here. But this is the way in which the secret schools brought forward some of the knowledge that they had about controlling people in the past using secrecy and other different manipulating tactics to do so. And they leveraged it in a way within the cult of the assassins to build an army of silent assassins, silent killers that could infiltrate into various places undetected, and given the command, they could eliminate targets that the sultan or whoever wanted gone at the time. So this was an interesting time period for sure back in the Middle East, and we had various factions trying to establish power and dominance in the area at the time. And this goes back to a guy named Hassan al Sabah, who was known as the Old Man on the Mountain. And he was one of the foundational people within the Order of the Assassins. And he's one of the ones that helped to establish some of the mind control methodologies that got these people within the order, once they were initiated into the order, to go and do his bidding. So they were so indoctrinated into their belief systems. They were so brainwashed into accepting certain things about this guy that they would do whatever they were told, to the point where he had an emissary there visiting him one day who was trying to make some kind of a broker some kind of a deal between Sabah and Saladin. And he showed him, he said, look out here on the ledges out here on the ledge of his castle high up on the hill. That's why he was known as the Old Man on the Mountain. He set up and established a base at an old fortress up there, and so they had battlements, and atop the battlements he had guards stationed. So he told the guy, he said, "Do your troops do your bidding like this?" And he pointed at one of the guys on one of the towers, and he told him to jump off, and the guy jumped off and died. And he said, "This is the kind of loyalty I have from my subjects. Are Saladin's men willing to go the same lengths as my men to accomplish things?" And this really got the envoy intrigued that he had this kind of power over these people, and that they would actually do his bidding to that degree, that he was really concerned about that, and he reported that back to Saladin. So this is something that really goes back in history. There's a really interesting deep history to all of this, but some of the methodologies that Sabah used to get his minions to do his bidding were very manipulative, and it all has to do with the belief systems of this Nizari uh, cult that developed into the assassins. So, and a lot of the mind control techniques that have been popularized and used today through the course of time by the intelligence agencies and stuff like that are all derived from this same type of methodology, although they use slightly different types of tropes to establish the brainwashing techniques and stuff today than they did then. But what this guy did is he weaponized their beliefs against them and had them believe that he alone had the power to determine whether when they die they would be received into paradise or not. And he used hashish as a means when he introduced these people to his palace there, to the castle, the fortress that he controlled up there, that he would use that in order to drug them and have them believe that he had let them slip into paradise for an amount of time once he brought them in. And once they were convinced enough of that, then he had their full attention and he convinced them that he alone had control of their access to paradise when they die. So if they died in his service, they would go to paradise, is what he told them. So that's how he got these people to actually perform these tasks up to and including their own death in the performance of these tasks. And this is one of the very interesting methods of mind control that was used even back then. But like I said, it's a lot more sophisticated today, and they have other means of getting things done today with technologies. But this was just weaponizing people's belief systems against them. And don't they still weaponize people's belief systems against them today? I would say very much so.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, uh, we will talk about the different subsections a little bit later, I suppose, but it's interesting that you mentioned this killer program because we still have it today, and that would be a delta programming in the Monarch programming. And yes, it has to do with the delta force as well, but as I said, we can go deeper into that a little bit later. Also, the Egyptian Book of the Dead gives instructions about torture and intimidation and how to use potions and spell casting. So allegedly, it is what the mind is experiencing after death, but certainly you can use those instructions also with a living being.
Right. And a lot of these things that are coming forward from Egypt, a lot of this was leveraged on by Saba in Alamut Fortress, the guy we were talking about, the old man on the mountain, the leader of the assassins. And he used some of these methodologies against the people because he knew some of this was brought forward from Egypt. There's a clear lineage of where all of this came forward. So these Nizari Ismaelis, as they were known, that became the cult of the assassins, they leveraged some of this old knowledge from Egypt. And this guy actually was friends with some prominent other people within the Islamic region at that time. I'm trying to think. There's a famous name that will come about that was associated with him, and I'm blanking on it. I'll think of it here later. There's a lot. I've done a lot of looking into this stuff in the past, but he had a lot of influence. This guy did. He had a lot of reach outside of just the fortress of Alamut, where he set up shop with the assassins. And he was so feared, and this cult was so feared in the region at the time that they really would listen and pay attention to what this guy was demanding from them, because if they didn't, they would find themselves being killed in the middle of the night. I mean, he had agents infiltrate into all these different competing sultans and stuff like this, palaces and things like that. So he had a lot of influence in the region at the time, and he was friends with a lot of people who became prominent very later. Omar Khayyam, that's who it was, who he was friends with. He was a close associate of Omar Khayyam. And I don't know why that name escaped me, but it's back now. This is what happens when you have so much information floating around. all the time. But at any rate, enough of me babbling about it. But this is one of the keys. They used some of this stuff from the old Egyptian Book of the Dead and various different things like that that were brought forward through the course of time through these various secret society groups. And the assassins were a primary conduit of this. And later on, there was a group that developed called the Roshaniya that are derived from these Nizari Ismaelis as well in all of that area in that region that brought forward more of this information through the secret society groups, and it got amalgamated into even the Templars' teachings. That's the thing most people don't understand. The assassins and the Templars, although they are depicted as being bitter enemies, what happened is at the topmost levels, these secret society groups interlocked at some point, and they began to teach the secret doctrine across the various orders that they had set up. So many of the methodologies and stuff adopted by the assassins got entrenched within the Templars. And from the Templars, we derive the modern day Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, as well as other groups that came forward from that time. And one of these conduits for this information, like I said, was the Roshaniya as well. So this was also an Islamist secret society. And we have a lot of crossover between many of these Islamic type branches of secret societies, along with other of the more traditional Western secret societies we're familiar with. It's all the same teachings. It's all the same doctrine that's been taught across the board. And certainly these mind control sciences are something that are taught at the highest, most levels within all of these groups. Like you have to advance through the initiation phases very far in these groups to get access to some of this information as to how to control people at the topmost levels. This isn't something for your basic Blue Lodge members, as we would know them in the Western culture today, looking at the Freemasons as one of the primary secret society groups that are known about in Western society today. So the vast majority of people who belong to an organization like the Freemasons are what you would call Blue Lodge Masons. They only go through the first 3 degrees of initiation and they go no further. And essentially, they're only the broad power base. They don't know what actually goes on at the highest, most levels of these different secret society groups. And they wouldn't believe you if you told them that, because they think they've seen it all and they know it all, because that's what they've been told by those higher up the chain than them, if they don't have what it takes to be pulled up the ladder into the more occult degrees of the various orders. So then they believe there's nothing to it. It's all conspiracy theory nonsense and stuff like that. And that it's just an old boys club, a good old boys club where you could go down to the local car dealership and get a square deal and things like this. That's what the most of them are involved with it in. Most of the guys that get involved in Freemasonry are just in it because they want to better themselves and they think it's the way that they can do so. They could kind of get their foot in the door with the big club and they could get special treatment and special deals from one another and help each other out. And they don't see anything wrong with that. Okay, that's all good on the face of it, but at the topmost levels, at the higher levels, and within these occult degrees of this system, you have a lot more devious things going on. And most of them don't have the first clue about it, and they wouldn't believe you if you told them. But they acknowledge, even in their own writings, that they lie to their own lower degree members about what they do and what's the true nature of the symbols they share and everything else. So it's even in their own words. They acknowledge that they lie to their lower level members. And this is how they establish themselves as a broad power base. Because these guys, they all vote the same way. They all do the same things. They all toe the same line. Because they've swore an oath to do so and to help one another and to not betray the secrets of the order. So they go along to get along with it. And they don't realize what they're actually feeding into and how those and the higher echelons, the higher degrees of these various occult secret societies use certain methodologies to establish agendas and to steer and control things. So even these Blue Lodge members, as we would call them, of the secret societies of the Masons, they do what those at the top of the order want done. And they don't even realize it. That's why I said, like, they all vote the same way and stuff. Well, where's that coming from? That's coming from somebody up the top of the occult chain of things that has an agenda in mind and wants to put it in play. So they tell all their guys, hey, you do this, and then you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And this is kind of how it works. And they don't realize they've been manipulated. And it is a form of mind control, even right down to the notion of secrecy. Secrecy itself can be used as a form of mind control. If I know something that you don't, that gives me an advantage over you. And if I can leverage that against you to get you to do something that would either empower that secret that I know, or disempower you from knowing that secret in some way, and it's to my advantage but not yours, and I do that and I convince you to do that, that's a type of mind control. And this is how these people operate. It's the most simple form of mind control is secrecy. And that's why JFK, in one of his speeches, he said secrecy is repugnant, and he tried to call out the whole intelligence community with that. And I think that was one of the things that ultimately led to his demise, because they didn't like him speaking that way publicly at that time. And they wanted to establish for sure that they had control, full control of the whole political spectrum at that time. So they made that abundantly clear. But at any rate, the secrecy is repugnant because secrecy can be used as a manipulation tactic, as a form of mind control, and it's still done today. And all you have to do to demonstrate this carte blanche is look at all the things happening in society and culture today. Look
Mm.
at the Epstein files, the UFO files, all of these things that have been kept secret. There's secret documents out there that and dossiers with this stuff, information that they're keeping hidden, the intelligence community is keeping hidden from the masses on purpose. Why? Because it gives them a type of an advantage and a type of control over people. So let's take the alien card, for example, the UFO phenomenon, the UFO files, which, by the way, there was a lot of rumors in the rumor mill saying that Trump was going to disclose something on July 8th on the anniversary of Roswell, but that didn't happen. So they're still holding on to this secret for a reason. And is there something to it? Maybe, maybe not. But here's the thing, if they know about it and you don't, then they could make you believe whatever they want about it. So there may not actually be aliens or extraterrestrials from outer space coming here. Maybe these are all secret advanced military man-made craft that they're
They are
using and utilizing.
interdimensionals.
Right, or other dimensions or something like that. The thing is, they may know something more about it, but they're not telling the public because they want to manipulate the public's perception of it. They want you to think in terms of, okay, this is extraterrestrial. That seems to be the model they've gone with. They want you to believe aliens from some planet in outer space came here in these advanced spacecraft and are just running around here disarming nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And we have no control over any of it. And we have no sway or influence over any of it. And it's a security threat, but it's not really a security threat. Like, these are the kind of things that they're trying to get out there with this. So they're manipulating people into believing this. So when they see
But there
something,
are accounts from people that were on those ships who said that something happened and they couldn't activate. Their weaponry was neutralized.
oh, absolutely. But see, could they prove that that was extraterrestrials that did that? No, that's
Yeah,
my whole point.
that's another story,
Discussion.
but definitely something did happen that was a
Right.
little bit weird.
But see, it's about perception control.
Mm.
That's what they want. So they want people to see, okay, well, this happened, but it wasn't us. It wasn't any secret man made weapons program that did this. It had to be those extraterrestrials. Maybe it wasn't. And I'm not saying there's not extraterrestrials. I'm not saying there's not aliens. There most likely are. It would seem the preponderance of evidence points to non human intelligences existing. Now, exactly what's the true nature of these? Who could say for sure? But they're trying to control the public perception of it and steer us into believing the extraterrestrial hypothesis as the feasible explanation for all of this. And it might not be the fact at all. And in using that, and this is even acknowledged within the circles of the CIA, they acknowledge that they've weaponized this and used this against the public. They've used public perception to disguise secret weapon programs as nothing more than the UFO phenomenon. So therefore, it's a type of secrecy that's been withheld, and it's a type of manipulation, and therefore a type of mind control. Now,
Mm.
something like this you could establish as being a soft form of mind control, but swaying public perception is a big form of mind control. And all you have to do is go back and look at the studies of Edward Bernays to understand how to steer societies into capitulation to certain things or believing in certain things. They make people believe in things that may or may not be true. And once they've done that, then they have wholesale control over your mind. All you got to do is look at the whole COVID scam they pulled on the world to understand how deep this could run and how much control they could establish in that way.
Yeah, I was just going to say that another simple form of mind control is constant repetition. And we saw that during the COVID years 24/7. And yeah, unfortunately, we know the result. Most people bought into it. But whenever something is, hyped up to that degree, I would be very, very cautious if, in general, no matter what the subject is, yeah, to get on the bandwagon. It's most likely a psyops. So, because you already mentioned the secret societies, I have a question. Let's say a high-level politician at one point joins a secret society. My understanding is that once that has happened, his first allegiance is to the secret society and no longer to his country. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's what they say in their own doctrines, the secret
Hmm.
society groups themselves. So they swear allegiance to the secret society above all other national or other interests, any other groups that they're in. And they take blood oaths avowing this. So it's in their own literature. I mean, I don't have to say, yeah, that's correct. I have no say in it. I'm not the one that put that in writing. The secret society groups themselves did.
Hmm.
So they acknowledge this, that they have their allegiance. They swear allegiance first to the order that they're a part of within their initiation rites and stuff like that. So it's all well established. So there's no sovereign nation state above these different secret society groups, and a lot of them cross borders between different nationalities. So you could be a Freemason on one side of a war, and you could have an opponent on the other side of the war that's also a Freemason. And we've seen there's stories about this that have come forward in the past in history where the one would show up the international freemasonic sign of surrender, and the other person on the other side would recognize that, okay, that's a fellow mason, and they would help them to step away from that without being harmed or anything like that. So they have these different signs that they use to establish that, especially like in a battlefield situation like that. So they have sworn oaths that they will help each other. So therefore, even if that person on the other side, that other side of this national war or whatever, this conflict, if they decide to just obliterate the other Freemason, well, they've violated their oath. And therefore, if some other Freemason or some other person within the fraternity finds out, then that person's going to be in a whole lot of trouble within that group. So they've already established, they've sworn these oaths to help one another when they're in need like that. So you've seen stories about this come out through the course of time with that. And that's all part of this. So yeah, national boundaries mean nothing to these secret society groups, and oftentimes they just use that as a facade or a cover to push whatever agenda they have going on. It would seem to me that all of these secret society groups at the topmost levels are interlocked together, and it's one unified group that constitutes what I would call a breakaway civilization that seems to run things in this world by and large right now. And they use a lot of these mind control manipulation tactics to do so. A lot of it's soft mind control, is what I would call it. Most people wouldn't acknowledge that they're being controlled in that way. They don't realize they're being manipulated when their opinions are formed by people they've never even met. Edward Bernays touched on a lot of this in his book Propaganda in the 1920s. So, I mean, this stuff goes back an awful long time. And these are all methods of manipulation of people, controlling people in these different ways that don't seem very obvious on the face of it, but they do have a very real effect. And we do see a lot of it happen. So
Mm,
you have a select few people in a small power base at the top that disseminate ideas and shape public opinion. And in the shaping of public opinion, you shape the entire culture and the perception of reality. And we could do the entire COVID thing as a case study on mind control because that's exactly what was involved. That was a massive mind control operation, like nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime.
mm. Yeah, I mentioned this because, as you know, I have a strong interest in Africa and what is going on there. And I recently mentioned Nelson Mandela and his, he became a Knights of Malta. And but that is not well received. There are very, very few Africans who dissect this, but the majority, they don't even want to hear it. It is their hero, and that's that. And if you come in and say something against Nelson Mandela, oh, they come out of the woodworks.
Well, that holds true in just about every nation on earth here.
Mm,
You got the same thing here in the United States. I mean, they have a lot of their political heroes, and how dare you say something negative about them, or they have some type of a connection to some group or something. Like you can see a lot of the diehard Donald Trump supporters get all bent out of shape if you mention anything about the guy's very shady background. Like he does, like no doubt about it, the guy has a lot of shadiness in his background for sure. He's got connections all over the place to these secret society groups, and it's all corrupt, but they don't want to see it. And you have the same thing on the opposite side of the political spectrum. All their heroes on that side can do no wrong, and it's all the same group. They're all working together, and they just you can't get across to people. They're so caught up in this Hegelian dialectic divide that they can't see things clearly, and they refuse to see things clearly, and that's all part of the mind control manipulation that's gone on. That's why they give you two political parties. You're going to fall into one group or the other because you could be easily steered and manipulated if they could lump you together with somebody else and say you're part of this group, you're part of that group, and they take advantage of the human being's need to belong. And that's what this is. It's all a sort of tribalism that goes back into the psychological standard of things that they manipulate on this level. So they have people pick sides. And when you pick sides, well, then you're mitigated to this camp or that camp. And then they could steer and manipulate you by manipulating the group mind rather than the individual mind, because it's a lot harder to manipulate and control an individual than it is a group. And this is something that is known and well established within the psychology of mind control itself. The group dynamic or the public think is different than the individual think on things, for lack of better terminology. So it's more easy to control a group when you have peer pressure that can make you want to conform to the group standard. That makes it much easier for them to adopt different policies and put them in place and steer and manipulate these entire groups in that way. So even if you do not affirm the group think, you're still getting carried forward with that because the bulk of the group is going to carry that idea forward, and then it becomes policy. And you may be a little bit of an aberrant for differing from that, but you're still going to be manipulated by that group because you belong to that group now. You've been, engrafted into it because you have similar belief systems as they do. And this is the whole premise behind the political divide. And it goes across the board. It's not just politics. They use everything. They use religious beliefs. They use philosophical beliefs, everything to manipulate people. Identity politics, another perfect example of that. They use the race card all the time. Racism as also the same trope. And you know why they do it? Because it works. Because it hits somebody on a primal level. It gives them an emotional response rather than thinking critically. And that's what they're all about. They're all about just eliciting the response from the people. It bypasses the cognitive mind and goes directly to what they would call like the reptilian brain, this uh, reaction system that we have, the instinct, the instinctiveness, the emotional response. They elicit the emotional response and get a reaction to that. And they don't want people to think critically and actually come up with solutions to the problem, or to take apart the problem itself and say, hey, there's nothing to this. Like this doesn't make sense. They don't want people to think deeply about anything. They just want them to react. So that's what they elicit from people. This is also a standard form of mind control. They kind of hijack your uh, responses, your animalistic responses to this. And it all comes down to this separation between the higher mind or spiritual mind and the animal mind, the physical mind, which elicits back this reptilian type archetype within the brain, that central nervous system, just response system. It's not about thinking, it's just reaction. And I can't emphasize that enough, because that's what they look for, especially in a group setting. That's why mass um, mind control works so effectively, because they just target the group at the most basic level they can, the animal level. They elicit a response, an emotional response from people, and then they could steer things how they want, because they get that massive response. And then if this whole group is responding in one way and you're kind of part of that group, well, if you go against that, then you're running the risk of being rejected by that group, or being a nonconformist, or not being able to get along in your life in the way that you have in the past. And it becomes a problem for you. So you just conform for the sake of conformity, so that you could comfortably belong to the group again and move on with things. They take advantage of this all the time. And I hope I'm not like speaking over people's heads with a lot of this stuff in the way I'm thinking about it, and trying to demonstrate it here. But this is how they do things. This is how they sway public opinion. And it's through the use, the leveraging of human psychology in this way, because they know if they elicit back to the most base response that they can, the emotional reaction, that they could steer large groups in certain directions with that. And most of them will fall for it. And don't we see that all the time? Most people fall for it because they don't want to think critically for themselves. They want somebody else to tell them what they need to believe or think, because
Yeah,
that's how they're most comfortable.
yeah, exactly. So, and then in 1776, the Rothschild family commissioned the Bavarian Jesuit Adam Weishaupt to centralize the power base of the mystery religions and into what is commonly known as the Illuminati. And I would say that is another step in that direction.
Most certainly it is. This was the Bavarian cult of the Illuminati. This was established by Weishaupt on May 1st, 1776. And it was said to have been totally abolished and disbanded by the 1790s, but that is 100% untrue. If you actually do the research for yourself and not believe the mainstream historical narrative, you will find there has always been this thread within the occult fraternities going back to the establishment of this Illuminati branch, and that it still exists even today and is an acknowledged thing. So it has not been disbanded and broken apart, even though it was discovered and they did infiltrate into all the other secret society groups. This kind of gave a, a, a face to the uppermost levels of all the interconnecting secret society groups. This is what this is. This is the inner circle within the inner circle, is what was established in this way. I would say it goes back to before Weishaupt, but it was Weishaupt who was tasked with actually consolidating all of the European occult systems together
Hmm.
and infiltrating into Freemasonry, which became a very popular vehicle for the transmission of occult information at that time. So this is where the Freemasons kind of got taken over a little bit at the topmost levels by some of these groups infiltrating as well, even though they do have the crossover of some of the teachings from the past as well. It's a convoluted mess of a story to look at, but you could trace the occult streams of knowledge through the course of time in this way. And Weishaupt was certainly an important figure in that, because they gave a face and a name now to this inner circle within the inner circle, this whole concept. And they did call it the Illuminati, but the name of the Illuminati goes back even longer and further back than that. It could actually be traced back to the foundation of the Jesuit order, because the original name of the Jesuit order, when it was formed, they were called Los Alumbrados, which literally translates to the Illuminati in English. And this is going back a couple hundred years before the establishment of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati by Weishaupt. So this is a name that's kind of been carried forward. And they changed the names throughout the course of time, a little bit here and a little bit there, but the concept's still the same. It's an inner circle within the inner circle. So it consolidates all the different secret society groups at the topmost levels, and all of the members within this Illuminati group infiltrate into the other secret orders and occult fraternities, and they cross over the ideas and disseminate down into the other groups from this topmost group here as to what they're looking for as far as agendas go. And they've established a presence in every nation on earth. They've established a presence all over the place in all forms of academia, all forms of business, finance, everything across the board. And it's an entire governance structure that exists outside the official government structures of the world. So this is how they infiltrate in and get ideas and messages spread around in this way. They have people who have established a presence within all these different industries and governments and all these different places throughout the world. And they've actually formed the intelligence community that we have today, the modern intelligence community. This is where the CIA, the Mossad, MI6, all of these different intelligence agencies that operate clandestinely around the world got their tactics from and got their methodologies from, is from these secret society groups. They were the original intelligence agencies. And this is how they've kind of established the intelligence agencies in the way that they have. They have networks everywhere, and they're all interconnected and interrelated across the world. So they have these connections to the secret society groups as well. So this is kind of how they get things done, and everything remains kind of clandestine and just beyond the reach of the average person to do something about it. So it's really kind of insidious when you look at it that way. And all of it is premeditated upon by this notion of controlling people's minds or perceptions in certain ways. And that's most certainly what the intelligence agencies are tasked with doing. They call it intelligence and counterintelligence and all of these different things. It's perception management. That's what these intelligence agencies do. And it all goes back to these occult fraternities.
So, have you ever encountered in your research a feud between different secret societies that was genuine? Or are they always hunky-dory?
I think there are some genuine beefs between some of them with others. And
Mm.
it's all about who's actually controlling things, who's pulling the reins here. They seem to be in agreement with the overall end goals of everything and the end phases of all of it, but it's all a matter of the semantics of how do we get there. They may differ in their opinions on how to get things done, and sometimes we see these struggles happen between these different factions of the secret society groups at the topmost levels. So they fight as to who gets to call the shots for a certain amount of time, and if it's not working how they intended, they might let the other group run things for a bit to see if they have better outcomes for their goals in that regard. So there's always been this kind of infighting going on, but I don't think it's a total situation where they're fighting one another for dominance or control. They're working together. That's why we have like this Illuminati structure, this inner circle within the inner circle, because at the topmost levels they're all working toward the same things, and they may not always agree on how to get it done, but they do sometimes argue as to whose idea is better and which way should we go with this. So sometimes they'll capitulate one with the other to try to get things done, and that'll look like a shift in policy, like a sudden shift in policy, like we have seen over the course of the past couple of years on the political spectrum. We've gone from a very leftist leaning type political fomenting going on to now a very right wing leaning fomentation going on. And this is what I'm talking about. So when you see a major shift like this that seems to come about rather suddenly, such as it has, then you could know that there was probably some infighting at the topmost levels. Hey, your way of doing this, it's not getting things done in an appropriate way or quickly enough for us. So we need to go some other route and try some other idea. So that's likely what's going on. So likely you probably have what I would call the Jesuit influence and the Freemason influence, and they seem to butt heads at certain points at the
Yeah,
topmost levels.
yeah.
And that's what's going on.
I think during, let's say, during the Biden era, a lot of things really went overboard, and there was more and more resistance and, anger coming from the grassroots level because people couldn't really comprehend what was going on and why everything was pushed so strongly. I remember, when they started to mutilate and cut off healthy organs from children and put them on certain drugs. And people were disgusted by it. Yeah, of course, not everybody. Some found it very wonderful. But I think the way they tried to do that, that was too much, too fast.
Exactly. Too much, too soon. And they had to compensate for that now. So now they've been trying to swing things back the other way. I think what happens is sometimes you get this group in power and they're calling the shots and they're pulling the reins of things. And sometimes they want to snap their agendas into place as quickly as possible and they push too hard, too fast. And I think that's what happened. So they were pushing some of this leftist slide into the public discourse far too quickly, and they got an appropriate backlash for that. So now they had to take a step back because I think they decided at the topmost levels of the power structure in this world, this inner circle within the inner circle, they said, hey, we're having an awful lot of resistance and we're getting some unexpected consequences from this. So we need to step it back. We need to take another approach. So how about you let this side have a go at it for a while. And now they've kind of pulled the reins back and pulled it back in the opposite direction. And with all the damage that's already been done, like you said, during this whole Biden administration, it was just too much too fast. So now they're trying to pull it back too much too fast as well to try to get back towards that central balance of things. And that's not working out so well for them either. So now you have all of this type of conflict resolution going on all over the place with this. Now, there are some people that are happy about them pulling back all these DEI initiatives and things like that. But then there's the other side are now disenfranchised because they've given an entire giant group of people victimhood status. And now they can't claim that victimhood status and have special treatment because of that. So this creates more of a backlash. So it creates more of a social schism between the people. And that's what we're seeing come to fruition right now. So we're seeing all kinds of pushback on both sides from this, but they're trying to course correct is essentially what's going on. Those ones that are controlling things at the top. So their attempt to course correct, they got to slow it down. And I don't think it's working for them because they already let the cat out of the bag. It's like opening Pandora's box. You can't put it back in now. They moved too quickly. They tried too hard. And a lot of this, once again, falls back to the COVID era. When you look at all the things that happened, that was the ultimate catalyst that really opened Pandora's box, in my view. And it showed in no uncertain terms what's really going on. Like I said, I think the whole COVID era thing is a giant case study in mind control because
Mm.
that is at the heart and soul of what all of it has been about. It's not some new disease or something that came about either naturally or was developed in a lab or something like that. It has nothing to do with that. It was an agenda that they put forward because they wanted to snap certain things in place on the political spectrum of things in a certain time frame, and they pushed too hard too fast, and they used all of these mind control tactics and methodologies in the most obvious way possible. And now people are beginning to finally wake up to that some 5-6 years later now as to what has actually been done, even though there were people like us who are calling it out from the beginning for what it is. But a lot of people don't catch on as quickly. But now the bulk of the masses are finally realizing, hey, there's something funny about all that stuff they did. Now it's finally sinking in. Something doesn't seem right with it. And now that it's too late for them to pull it back, the cat's out of the bag. Like I said, they opened Pandora's box. You're not stuffing it back in there. And they're getting a lot more backlash from a lot broader group of people than what they were initially with this. And they have a problem on their hands. So they're trying to manipulate things again to bring about the agendas they want. So they had to push back their time frames on a lot of this stuff because all of this has to do with their Agenda 2030, which was originally the Agenda 21. Remember, they wanted all of this in place by the year 2000 initially, but it wasn't going as well as they had thought. So they pushed it back and made Agenda 2030. And now they're probably going to have to roll that back too
Yeah.
because they're not hitting their time frames with this stuff, with their central
Oh,
planning.
yeah. Yeah, what you just said with they gave certain groups entire victimhood status. When I think about what I did as a job, you know, I want pilots in the cockpit that know what they are doing. And just giving the job to somebody because he is of a certain race, he identifies as this, that, and the other, or because it's a female, that is not a criteria in my mind. Yeah. And it is not even really colorblind or anything blind because pick the best person, and then yes, it should not matter if it's male, female, black, white, yellow, whatever. But they did exactly the opposite.
Exactly. That's what all of these initiatives were for. It's called ESG, the whole agenda behind this. It all has to do with the ecosystem and social system. I forget what ESG stands for, but this is what brought all these DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, different policies in place like that. It's a whole thing that's been promulgated from the big bankers all the way down. That's where that all originated from. You have these big financial centers that lend money to corporations, to companies who are looking to expand or develop new business or something. They put these policies in place. If you want to borrow this money from us, if you want to do business with such and such a bank, one of the big banks was one of the major credit card holders. I did a couple shows breaking this down, and I actually have a book out there about this. If you want to do business, well, then you have to follow these policies. You have to make sure you're hiring people of a certain ethnicity, a minority group, something like that. You have to institute these policies within your company where you're tolerant of people's sexual orientation and all of this stuff, and you're showing a certain percentage of your employees fit this criteria, and you're promoting these ideas out there in your advertising and stuff like that models. If you do that, then we'll give you this money. We'll lend you this money at such and such an interest rate. I think it was American Express was one of the, if I remember correctly, was one of the major credit card companies that was doing this. So this is where this all comes from and foments from central banking. That's where the whole DEI initiative came from, this whole ESG agenda. It's where it all came from. They decided they wanted to do this and push these policies. That's why we have all of this push for all this transgenderism and stuff like that across the board, and all this racial divide and all of these new racial tensions and stuff like that have been promoted and promulgated through the political spectrum in recent years. That's where it started. The central planning from the central banks, which is all controlled lock, stock, and barrel by these secret society groups and the big money interests that control them by and large. You look back at like the Rothschilds and all of these different families that have a lot of power and influence in the banking system. This all has to do with it. And there's other families involved, not just the Rothschilds. They're kind of the scapegoats that they give us to look at as far as who's responsible for this. And yeah, they do have a lot of influence in a lot of these things, but they're kind of the ones that have been put out there as the public face of these black nobility families, these royal family bloodlines that control the banking systems and all of that stuff at the topmost levels, that are hooked into these different secret society groups, this Illuminati base at the top of all of it. So when you begin to understand how this all promulgates in that way, it all comes from central planning, then you begin to see something devious is going on, because these are not just grassroots things that have happened. This is not the normal state of being in this world. These agendas have been pushed, promulgated, and have been used as a trope to manipulate the masses, to manipulate mass psychology into the acceptance of these things that at one time were not even thought of in that way. Like, look at the whole advent of all these racial tensions and stuff that are going on today. I thought back in the 1990s that was a thing of the past. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 1990s when it seemed like racial differences and stuff, oh, we're done with racism. We're done with that. We're
Mhm.
just using common sense, and like we don't care what somebody's ethnicity is. As long as they're good to us, we'll be good to them, you know? And I thought we were past all that. But then when they brought about the whole Obama administration and stuff like that, they reignited all the racial tension stuff. They used the race card again, and they reignited all of these different divisive strategies. Once again, these mind control tactics, because that's what it is. And then from there, they've escalated these things to where they are today.
Yeah. So we also have what I found interesting when I write about this subject, that at a certain point, Germany and England were very connected in terms of behavioral science and even eugenics. And in 1882, in England, the first Behavioral Science Institute was founded, established, and who also plays a role in that is the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. They pioneered a lot of these psychiatric techniques. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that all connects to the Frankfurt School and Tavistock. And many people have probably heard of Tavistock. That's where all of this comes from. So that, yes, we have that German link into this whole British notion of things with the development of Tavistock, which has brought a lot of this stuff forward today. And this is where they've done a lot of academic research about mind control techniques, really. They won't necessarily call it that. They call it psychology, they call it sociology, all of these things. But certainly there were groups within those different schools of thought, those academic portions of it, that were using this to manipulate people and to see how far they could push things with mind control techniques and stuff like that. So we have all of these different connections within that. And Tavistock is a big base for a lot of that, even today. That's where
Yeah.
we get a lot of these different agendas and stuff pushed from, and how they manipulate people in this group psychology type way with a lot of that stuff. So Tavistock was a central hub for a lot of this stuff, and there were certain figures within the Tavistock system that put forward ideas, guys like Kurt Lewin and others, who have been,
Became director. He was in,
yeah,
and Tavistock Institute actually studied the human breaking point.
exactly. That's what they did. They like came up with models and systems and mathematical formulas that they could use in order to control people. They tried to establish a quantifiable system to control people, and that's what they largely did at that point, is through
Yeah.
the establishment of this. So
And that
there's a lot to it.
interestingly in 1932 when he became director.
Yeah, and he had a lot of influence there. He was one of the big names there. There were other doctors and stuff associated with that program too, but Kurt Lewin was one of the big ones involved with that, with setting up this whole quantification system for it. And then you had the other ones, the other pioneers like Dr. Jose Delgado developed the actual notion of what he called stimosievers, which was the initial invention of the brain chip.
Mhm.
And that's where the electronic portion of this came in, and they began to study how different radio frequencies and stuff like that could affect human behavior as well. So there's an entire basis of psychology and basis of mind control technologies that came about from those early studies about that. So,
Mm.
and all of them interconnect. I mean, it all goes with academia. I think Delgado was a professor from Yale, if I remember correctly, and he was interconnected with this Tavistock group and stuff as well. So we have all of those different connections with this, but electronic mind control is just a modern take on some of the old methodologies, and they like to use technologies in this way. But Delgado was one of the pioneers studying that, and he
Mm.
was able to demonstrate certain things like using remote controls and implanting brain chips, these stimosevers, into the brains of animals. Like he did this with rats. He did it with in a famous experiment with a bull, where he had a brain implant in the bull, and he got in the ring with the bull. The angry bull was charging, and he pushed a button on the remote control, and the bull stopped and turned around and walked the other way, de-escalated the bull. So he demonstrated proof of concept with this, using electronic devices to control animals' behavior and human behavior by proxy. So all of these things were established early on, and they've since then become a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah. So, believe it or not, our first hour is already gone. That was fast. So, yeah, this was the public hour, and we will see the patrons on the other side.